What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. Today we're putting new brakes on this BMW X3. Fairly straightforward process, but I figured I would show you how to do it. Let's get right to work. So like any other brake job, first thing you need to do is get the wheel off. In this case, it's just 5 17mm lug bolts. Then you need to get these are your brake caliper slides, and they'll have little plastic covers over the end. You need to take those little plastic covers out of the way. One on the upper, one on the lower. And then you can loosen your caliper slides. These caliper slides use an Allen headed bolt. It is a 7mm Allen. So I'll get those loose and then we'll be able to get the caliper pulled off away from the rotor. Okay, I've got my brake caliper slides loose. Now I'm going to be replacing the brake rotors also, so I'm going to remove the entire brake caliper bracket, and that bracket is held on with 2 more bolts that are 16mm. There we go. Now I've got my brake caliper and brake caliper bracket hanging up here on the strut so as not to put any stress or tension on the rubber brake hose. Now I need to get the brake rotor off. And the brake rotor is held in place by this little 6mm Allen headed bolt. Make sure you get that Allen wrench all the way in there. You do not want to round that bolt out. Loosen that bolt and then you should be able to get your brake rotor off. There we go. I've got my old brake rotor off. Now I'm going to put the new brake rotor on and then put my new brake pads in. At this point, it's essentially just put it back together in the opposite order that you took it apart. Okay, so I've got my brake caliper here, separated from the brake caliper bracket. Now, I need to compress the brake caliper piston back into the caliper. And the way that I've learned how to do this and done this for years and years is with a C-clamp. Now, it's very important that you do this slowly. It's not a race. There are lip seals inside of that cylinder that you can't force them. They're only meant to move a little tiny bit at a time. So go slow, take your time, gently squeeze that piston back into the caliper. There we go, slow and steady. Now, before I start putting my caliper and bracket back on with my new brake pads, I'm gonna wipe this rotor off with some brake parts cleaner. Boom. I've got my brake caliper bracket bolted back in place, brake rotor in place. It's been wiped off with brake clean on the front and the back. Now I'll get my new brake pads installed into the caliper. The piston side pad is the one with the little clip on it. The pad with flat on the back of it is the outside, the wheel side of the pad. The friction material, this stuff here, this is what goes against the brake rotor on both pads. Okay, so now we've got our caliper back in place with the new pads on it, the inner and the outer new pad. Last thing we need to do is snap the little anti-vibration spring back on the outside here. Make sure you match this up with your old one, because they did make different sizes of these. There she goes. There we go. This side's done. We'll put the wheel back on, jump over and do the other side the same way. So I've got this side completely apart now. This is the driver's side front. I'm going to clean my brake rotor with brake clean and then compress the caliper, put it all back together. If you're not familiar with these BMWs, they do incorporate, I think it's just called a brake pad wear indicator into these things. Your new brake pads should come with a new wear indicator. I have yet to be able to get one apart without breaking the old one. So your new pads should come with new ones. And they're just a plug and play. Nothing complicated, nothing tricky to it. Unplug it out of the little connector here behind the strut. Make sure you put all the little wire fasteners back into the little C-notches where they go. And that's it. Remove and replace. There's nothing special or fancy or tricky about it. It's pretty simple. All right, there we go. We've got the front brakes done on this. New pads, new rotors on both sides, and the new brake wear sensor on the driver's side. Passenger side does not have a brake wear sensor in the front. So I'm gonna call it there for tonight. We'll do the rears in the morning. All right, it's the next day. We've got the wheel off. We've got the little protective dust caps off from the caliper bolts. So this goes basically like the front. I'll remove the 2 caliper pin bolts. I'll remove the 2 caliper bracket bolts. Then I'll remove the Allen head disc brake retaining screw. I'll pull the disc rotor off. This rotor has metal to metal contact. So that's what she was hearing when she was driving. I have new pad, new rotors that'll get put onto this. And I mean, it's really very much the same process as working in the front, just working on the rear. The nice thing about these is, at least on this one, BMW used all the same size fasteners. So I don't need to go find a bunch of different tools. It uses the same size fasteners as the front brakes. So I've got my brake pads, my brake caliper bracket removed. On the rear brake rotor, your parking brake assembly is contained inside of this hat here. And sometimes the rotor will still just come right off. Sometimes those parking brake shoes will be caught on the lip on the inside of the brake rotor hat. So to adjust these, there's no access hole like in other systems. You need to pull your brake caliper or your brake rotor out a little bit. And then if you see right in here, there's a little toothed gear wheel. And you need to loosen the tension on those parking brake shoes by turning that wheel. Turning it one direction will make it tighter. You probably won't be able to turn it very far that other way. Turning the other direction will make it looser. And once you get it loosened, then you should be able to pull your rotor off just like that. Okay, now before I put everything back together, I did just want to show you. This is the outer brake pad, what's left of it, and you can see we had metal to metal contact. There's no friction material left at all on this brake pad. You can see the evidence of it here on the rotor also, where it's all scratched and pitted out. That's from that metal to metal contact. So this is definitely a full pads and rotors required brake job. So now we've got our disassembly done and I've got my new parts. I'll start putting it all back together. You know, I say this all the time, but installation is the opposite of removal. Just put it back together in the opposite order that you took it apart. All right, everybody, so I'm going through editing this. As you just saw, I took it out for a test drive, it came back, and there was some rubbing coming from the rear when I got back. I was in a hurry to try to get this thing finished up, so I didn't have time to mess around with the camera and show you. But what I found was the lip of the parking brake shoe surface was touching the dust shields on the inside behind where the brakes all go. I'll put a picture here showing you exactly where I'm talking about. So for whatever reason, that lip stuck out about 10 thousandths further on the new brake rotors than it did on the old ones. So I wound up clearancing that edge down so that it wouldn't contact the backing plates, the dust shields anymore, and then that took care of the rubbing. Everything else worked fine. It stopped really well, the brakes were quiet, didn't have any issues. Just for whatever reason, there was that difference in machining between the new rotors and the old ones, and it was causing contact. Fortunately, a relatively easy solution to that. My wife's coworker, whose car that was, she's been driving it fine, hasn't had any issues, and it was a fun job to do, and glad I was able to help her out. But that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you're learning something or at least a little bit entertained. And until the next video, take care.